What if the chapter you didn't want in your life was given to you so you can eventually help others navigate some of life's most challenging experiences? This is the Your Next Success podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Carolyn Sagal. I am a life-first career coach and strategist on a mission to normalize questioning your career, because I believe each of us is made on purpose for a purpose only we can fulfill. The longer we live out of alignment with who we are, what we do best, and why we are here, the more we miss out, and the more the world misses out on what only we can give. The Your Next Success podcast is where we explore how to build a career that truly fuels your life. We talk about self-discovery, smart job search strategies, professional growth, and you will hear stories from people who have navigated big career transitions themselves so you can create a life-first career and become your own version of authentic success. My guest today is Judy Pearson, author, speaker, and someone who has lived through chapters she never would have chosen and found meaning on the other side. In this episode, Judy shares her story of resilience, reinvention, and what it means to keep moving forward when life does not go as planned. We talk about the experiences that shaped her, how writing became part of her process, and why even the hardest seasons can carry something forward in you to help others. Welcome, Judy, to Your Next Success. I am thrilled to be talking with you today.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled as well.
We're going to get into all the awesomeness of the things that you have done, how you support women, how you've written so many beautiful stories of others. But let's get a little bit deeper into your story. Tell us, where were you born and what was life like for the very youngest Judy?
I was born in Southwest Michigan, right on Lake Michigan, which if you've never seen it, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's like an ocean. You can't see the other side. People who see it for the first time, or any of the Great Lakes for that matter, but I'm obviously partial to Lake Michigan, are pretty amazed by it. It's really an astounding place. And it's a big time farming community. My little town, my little hometown, is the national blueberry capital of the world, which is pretty exciting. And it was a great life. I mean, it was pretty Ozzie and Harriet. My father worked, my mother stayed at home. She had been a secretary before I was born. I have a brother who's 7 years younger than I am, and who is still an irritating as hell little brother. We just spent last weekend together. He and his wife drove to Georgia. We drove up to Georgia. For a book festival I was involved in, and he was very supportive, but then he made sure to take the worst possible pictures of me on stage as possible, which is what little brothers are supposed to do. I went to Michigan State. My dad told us that we could go to any college in the city of East Lansing we wanted to go to. There's only one. It's Michigan State. And he had actually played football at State, and we had been going to football games because he graduated from there as well after being in the Air Force. And we went to football games from little on. So it was kind of nice going to a campus that I was so familiar with. My degree was in French. First, I wanted to be an actress, and he said, yeah, that's not in the picture. And then I wanted to go to art school with my girlfriend to become an interior designer. And he said, well, you can become an interior designer, but you're not going to art school. You're going to get a real education. So finally, when I said, okay, I'd go to Michigan State, I was taking a French class. I'd had French in high school, and I was taking a French class just for fun and realized how much I loved it. So my degree is in French. I spent a year in France going to l'Université de Haute-Bretagne, which is about 120 miles west of Paris. And because of living there, I became fluent in French, and I still pretty much am. When I get bored, if I'm in the car alone, I turn on news and then try to translate as fast as I can as they're repeating news stories. Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's an interest, it's a fascination, and it's a way to kind of keep this skill current that was built on top of, if you picked it up so quickly, that's built also on top of an ability that you had to be able to be able to do that. So I think that's amazing because we have to use our abilities or otherwise we're not feeling holistically fulfilled. So
That's
now I want to back it up a little bit though. So in that, let's say school age years, like elementary, middle, high school, before you got to Michigan State, what was it that you enjoyed doing the most? Like, were there school subjects that you were particularly fascinated by, and or were there activities or things you did outside of school? Because you mentioned this actor, like, were you in theater? Like, what? Give
no,
more.
that
You
was
just want, yeah.
why can't I be an actress? No, I was a cheerleader. That was my main thing. I
Oh,
was a cheerleader all 4 years. I played in the band the first 2 years because
what'd you play?
well, hold on, but I was just gonna say the first 2 years because once I became a varsity cheerleader, then I couldn't play in the marching band and be a cheerleader. I started out with a clarinet and then realized I was like seat number 17 of 18 clarinets. But the drum section was all boys, and they didn't have a glockenspiel, the bells. And so I convinced the band director to let me teach myself how to play the bells and march around with the boy. And
Oh
then
my
during
gosh.
during
Yeah.
the concert season when we weren't when we didn't have football games, then I actually got to stand with all the boys in the drum department and play the xylophone or whatever other gizmos they needed me to do.
Did you ever play piano?
I taught myself piano. Actually, it's funny. My mother was very gifted playing the piano. My brother, I don't know if he took lessons or not, but he can play better than I can. Um, but I taught myself how to play first a ukulele and then a guitar. And so understanding chords and
Yeah.
notes, that made the glockenspiel a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you have a piano since your mother was a good piano
We
player?
had the coolest piano. She bought it from a neighbor. When I was really little, we had an antique player piano, the kind that you put the rolls in.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, it was really cool. And then that went by the wayside. And anyway, my mother bought this piano from a neighbor who was moving. It was absent and octave on each end. It was a little black piano. It was either used for by people in apartments or people who played in speakeasies. It was on little tiny casters. And I moved that dang thing from Michigan to Phoenix to Michigan to Phoenix. And when it came time to move to Florida, I was like, you know what? We had already bought our house down here. And I said, there's no room. There's no point. My brother said, well, I'll come get it. I'll have somebody move it. And then he discovered that was going to be thousands of dollars. So the piano didn't make it to Florida, but it was good enough for my mom to play on. She'd play Christmas carols and things like that. And then I think that must be what my brother learned on. I had let it go very far out of tune. It was basically just kind of a cool thing in my living room.
Like a nice decoration.
Yeah.
I'm a proponent of sometimes things that we're fascinated by and interested in our younger years, they're part of who we are. Sometimes people override them and then we pick them up later. But I find it fascinating that you have all these different musical influences, desires, even listening to music, enjoying it, and teaching yourself how to do things that, sparked your interest, as well as being a cheerleader of others
Yes.
for whatever their seasons are, whatever the game is.
That's right.
You had that foundation of being a cheerleader. Okay.
Ooh, I like
So now
that.
when
That's good.
I've just always been fascinated by trying to help connect the dots and help people see some of those other things. Okay. When you were trying to consider, I guess, was college always something that you were going to do? Like that just became part of like you knew you were going to go to college?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't want to make my father out to be some kind of a horrible draconian individual. He was not. He was wonderful, hilarious, part Archie Bunker, part John Wayne, part General George C. Patton. I mean, he was so fun. Um, and it's funny because my parents were of an era that if a woman worked, it meant that the husband couldn't provide for her, which is ridiculous. But there was never a question that I would go to college and that I would work. And I don't even remember when my first son was born, I don't even remember him making a snide comment about me going back to teaching, which is what I was doing after my son was born. My first son was born and after the second one was born. So it wasn't, it was kind of interesting. He was an interesting guy.
So when you went to go to college, though, you did you go in as a French major, or you went in undecided and wanted to explore those things? Like, when did this conversation of, "Ooh, no, that's not going to be your actual major"? Was that pre or post enrollment?
So when I couldn't go to art school with my girlfriend, who's still very much my girlfriend, who's a fabulous fine artist now, she wanted to paint full time. I wanted to write full time, but we both realized that we needed actual careers. So I did go into the interior design department at Michigan State, which was called, it was part of the College of Human Ecology, which used to be home economics. And the requirements to get a degree from that department, part of the requirements included classes in child development. I hated kids. I was like, why do I have to do this? What does this have to do with paint color and draperies? And so I lasted like 3 weeks, called home and said, yeah, this ain't for me. But I was taking this French class and really loving it. And quite honestly, by the end of my sophomore year, so I spent my junior year in France. By the time I came back from France, I still had a year to go. There were no more undergraduate classes for me to take. I had already gone through everything. So I started taking graduate classes still as an undergraduate.
Now, where did this fascination with writing begin?
I absolutely loved writing. I've still got the notebook. I just talked about this the other day at an event. I grew up, came of age, I guess is the best way to put it, during the Vietnam War. So there was a lot of teenage angst. Friends of mine were worrying about the draft. We'd already had a couple of guys killed in the war from town. And so I just started writing things. And then one of the things my mom always said when I would come home from school, if the first thing out of my mouth was, I'm going down to the beach to walk, she knew that something was in my head that I needed to work out. And it's so funny because I still do my best thinking on walks, both my morning walks with my dog or beach walks that, I can take every
Yep.
day if I want here. And it's just so funny. So a lot of times I'd go think things through and I would start imagining stories. And I wrote mostly short stories, but I still have them. It's hysterical.
Oh,
And
that's
just
awesome.
one day, I hoped that I could be a writer and actually make money at it. But sort of put it on the back burner, got married 5 years later, had kids, then went into radio. And it was a long time before I actually got to the point where I could write full time.
So walk me back a little bit. Okay, so this is awesome. So this started at a very young, early age, kind of just like a side hobby thing that you did and you enjoyed. And then you had the things that you had to do,
Yep.
school or whatever that may be. So you went to France as a junior. You then graduate with your degree in French. And then how did this teaching come about?
So that was what I was going to do, is become a teacher. And
Oh,
so I had an interview. I was getting kind of worried. The summer was going on after graduation. I was getting married that August, and we didn't know where we were going to live because he still had another year of school to go, and we were going to live wherever I got a teaching job, and the clock was ticking, and I still didn't have a job. So I had this interview in a little town called Lapeer, which is outside of Flint, Michigan, which is now famous for its really deadly
yep.
water. And so, my then fiance, now ex-husband, and I went to Lapeer for this interview. Scott was in the library across the street from the superintendent's office, and the superintendent said, well, we're building this new high school, so there'll be 2 high schools in town. So you would be teaching at the new school. And because Title IX is going into effect this year, we have to have women coaches to fulfill what Title IX is requiring, which was that there be sports available for women as well as men. So he said to me,
Interesting.
"What can you coach?" And I said, "Well, I was a cheerleader in high school and college. I cheerleading." And he goes, "No, we already have a cheerleading coach." And I said, "Okay." I was on the swimming team one year. Nope, we don't have a pool. Okay. I don't know. What do you want me to coach? And he said, "You can have basketball, softball, or track." And I said, "Could you excuse me just a minute?" And I ran across the street to the library where my fiance was and said, "What can you coach?" And he said, "Take basketball." And he and his brother were both great athletes. And so I went back, I took basketball. I had no clue. I mean, we were a football house. I didn't know anything about basketball whatsoever. The first year was just awful. It was the first year of women's sports. I mean, we would have final scores of 9-4. And it was just and it's funny now, but the other two coaches with whom I became really good friends and I have gotten together a couple times over the years, it was also really hard. The male coaches and the male athletic director were so misogynistic and such just jerks. We couldn't get court time to practice. We couldn't use the men's locker rooms during games when there weren't other guys in there, when the opposing team would go in there, and that was true across the conference. So
Wow.
you had two varsity girls teams and two JV girls teams in the same locker room at the same time with four adult women trying to keep fights from breaking out. It was crazy. And they were and the men were so mean to us. And so I think now with all the discussion that's going on, nobody remembers those roots and how hard it took us to even get sports at all, much
Mhm.
less what we had to go through once we got them. So anyway, that's my little soapbox. But it was a great experience. I taught for 5 years. The last year, I had built the French program up to such an extent. If everyone came to a couple of my classes, I didn't have enough chairs. I didn't have enough books. And when you're
Oh, wow.
teaching a foreign language, you have to speak with the kids as well. So, 40 kids in a classroom was just untenable. And when I complained, the principal said, "Then we'll just cut kids." And I thought, I've worked for 5 years for this. I don't think so. So I quit.
Yeah. I think that's also a lesson in standing up for your own self, right? And something can be a great experience for a chapter, but it doesn't have to be the whole
That's
book. It doesn't have to be the whole thing.
And I should also say there was another incident. So I was the JV coach. The varsity coach with whom I was very, very close got pregnant the year before me. So she was going to leave. And I mean, who else would take the varsity position but me? We didn't have assistant coaches. There was no one else. There was just me. And so I applied for it. And the athletic director sat me down and said, "Well, we're going to give that varsity position to the boys' varsity basketball coach because the boys' team played in the winter and the girls played in the fall." And I said, "Are you kidding me? Why?" And he was like, "Well, he has more tenure than you do." And I said, I wanted to say, "And how are his ovaries today?" But I didn't.
Right? Yeah.
And so I said, I kind of reiterated the locker room situation. And I said, "Who's going to be in the locker room breaking up fights that break out?" "Well, we
Right.
thought you would." And I said,
Oh,
"And who is it, since we're building young women and they need a mentor to come to, who is it that these young women are going to come to, him or me?" "Well, we thought they'd come to you." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, you thought wrong." So first I quit basketball and then I quit teaching. I
yeah.
was
Well,
so
because
mad.
they wanted you to still do all of the work without the authority, without the title, without the compensation
Yeah.
for those
Yep.
things.
So
Good for you.
the today Judy would have just talked like a truck driver, but the then Judy said, "Okay, bye."
Okay. And then what happened? Then you were home with your child or you
Well,
went to
no,
work somewhere different?
I
Yeah.
so I quit the end of the year in June. We had a friend who worked in radio, and he said to me, "I think you'd be really good as an account executive in the sales department selling ads for radio. And so I said, okay. So I interviewed with a couple of stations. I had a couple of job offers, absolutely zero experience at all. Actually, in between, as I was phasing out my teaching career, I was also selling Mary Kay Cosmetics, which is how I learned to sell. I praise Mary Kay all the time. I don't use any of the products, but I praise her sales techniques. So I went into radio with kind of a pop station in Flint, and there were no female disc jockeys. And so the morning guy said to me one day, "Hey, we need somebody to do a Snow White voice for this ad that we're doing for Disney World. Can you speak like Snow White?" And I said, "Oh, I would love to speak like Snow White." And he was like, "Great, that's it. Get behind the microphone." So then I started doing bits for them. Then I got hired by lots of people who wanted commercials read by females. Then I got television gigs. I mean, it was like super fun.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So you followed the suggestion from a family friend that said you might be really good at this. But how did you get into the Mary Kay side? Somebody you knew recruited you to
Yep.
be part of their team? Or
A
yeah.
sister teacher who not only was pregnant at the same time I was with my second son, but our boys were born on the same day.
Oh, wow.
So
Oh, wow.
she was in Mary Kay, and she said, "This is great," because we were both still teaching. "This is great. We can still keep teaching, and we can sell Mary Kay. And then when summer comes, then we can sell Mary Kay over the summer." And so I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." So I did that, and I sold Mary Kay over the summer, and then I got this radio job. Can't remember exactly, but it was pretty close to maybe it was like later it was after Sean was born, now that I'm thinking about it. So after son number 2 was born. That's right. Why would anyone hire me 9 months pregnant? So after son number 2 was born, then I started my radio career about November of that year.
Oh, and now how did that evolve into then what? And then what happened?
So first of all, because I had never been in sales like that before, I I didn't know I didn't know what a no was. And so, because you can always talk a woman into buying a lipstick, but I was asking people to spend, big money on my radio station. And the other sales executives, I'd say, "Well, is anybody calling on such and such car dealership?" "Oh, he'll never buy from you. He doesn't buy from anybody." And then I'd come back with an order because I was too stupid. And
Well, persistent. I think you were persistent. You were just
well,
wanting to.
that
Yeah,
old
you saw an
TV
opportunity.
That's
to
right.
help
You know
them.
that old TV show with Peter Falk?
Yes. What was that?
I can't think of what his name was. Columbo.
Yes. Yes.
And he keeps coming back to whoever he's been interrogating, going, "Just one more thing." And I kind of started doing that. Somebody would say, "No, I don't want to buy your rate from your radio station." I'd be like, "Okay, I just want to tell you this one other thing." And then I'd say something else. I think they bought from me just to get rid of me because I just wouldn't leave. Or I'd come back with lunch and I'd say, "Okay, let's talk a little more."
No, but this is great because you were building relationships, you were building rapport. And what I learned when I was doing recruiting is most people would give up. And this was recruiting like there was a job that a chemical company couldn't fill on their own. And so they tried to outsource that recruitment to the
Right.
firm that I worked for. And so then I had to, it wasn't like we just put a job posting and people dropped their name in a bucket and then you go, but it was more like you had to actually go out and find the people who could possibly do that super specific job, then engage with them, then convince them to put their name in a hat and all of those things. And most people would give up after 1, 2, or 3 attempts at connecting.
Right.
But the sweet spot was between 8 and 12.
Wow.
And so I saw that metric and I was like, well, okay, then, let's go.
Yeah.
And so, but it sounds like even without having somebody tell you that metric, you were just being persistent and kept going and kept trying and formed a relationship that they then began to either trust you or who cares, get rid of you. And you still helped them with this advertisement
That's right. That's right.
thing. So
Yeah. Oh, this when we moved from Michigan to Phoenix, um, the radio station threw a going away party for me at a local bar that we all hung out at. And it was so funny because so many of my clients came, especially clients from had known me since the very beginning, who laughed about the fact that Judy just wouldn't leave.
now, what was it that made you want to move from Michigan to Phoenix?
My still then husband had a best friend who lived in Phoenix, and he was getting married. We went out for his wedding. My husband was the best man, and we absolutely fell in love with the city. It was the dark days of the auto industry in the Rust Belt. You know, prices were through the roof for everything. Interest rates were through the roof. It was dark and cold in Michigan, and the sun shone brightly in Phoenix. And so, unfortunately, that was in like March. We didn't know how brightly the sun shone till we moved there. And like, oh, it gets hotter here. But it was just absolutely. It was like walking into like a wonderland. In fact, I said as I'm driving through the city the first time, well, this isn't Kansas anymore, Toto.
And so he then got a job and you followed and got a job as well, or you both got jobs together, or how did that?
We came back to Michigan, went back to Michigan, said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Both of our sets of parents thought we'd lost our minds. And we just packed up and we got jobs ahead of time, both of us, but then we just packed up and moved. And I went back into radio. He had been working in banking in Michigan, so then he got a job in banking. And I had moved to a different station before we divorced. And I think he had moved as well. So we both took those first jobs and then made a couple of resets in jobs because you don't know,
And know it all.
and
Yeah.
people promise you the world. Oh my gosh, you're going to make so much money. You're going to have such a great list. That's not
And
true.
then it doesn't happen. Yeah. Well, or they want, I was just talking with a young lady getting ready to graduate and get her first job. And she said, well, how do I answer when they ask, how long are you looking to work here? And I said, you go ahead and answer and say, I'm really looking for a long-term opportunity. And so long as I'm able to perform and also enjoying the experience, I'm looking for something for a long time. And I'm like, and you're not obligated to stay there because you can undecide just as quickly as they decided, or they can undecide just
That's
as
right.
quickly as they. And so there is no loyalty, but go ahead and act as if, because even marriages, even beautiful marriages that are supposed to be till death do us part, sometimes they don't necessarily work out.
And that's only because murder is illegal. Otherwise, it would have been death to us part. I just like to toss that out there.
Imagine what your life would be like if your career aligned with who you are, what you do best, and actually fueled the life you want. At Next Success, we support all ages and stages through career transitions, from students exploring majors or careers to job seekers actively searching or reimagining their next move to professionals committed to self-awareness and leadership growth. Stay connected and explore what's possible at nextsuccesscareers.com and follow Next Success Method on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Okay. So we've talked a couple times about this. My husband, my now ex-husband, now this fun side comment. But like, what happened with that? So while your career is kind of going and you're, mom to these beautiful children, you had taken a lot of things with this man who you thought was going to be your forever person. And then what happened? What happened with that?
The best I can figure is we just grew apart. He became very serious after we got married about about being a provider, being a parent. He never, which, is usually the opposite of what most women complain about, but he never wanted to go anywhere without the kids, like even a vacation and he never wanted to go anywhere with just me. It was always another
Oh,
couple, or we'd come down to Florida every winter. My parents would come down here, so we'd come down to Florida and stay with them, or it was always something like that. And finally, I just said, this isn't working. It was 15 years. I mean, we gave it
yeah,
a go. And I said, this just isn't what I really want.
yeah.
And he said the same thing. And so we went our separate ways.
And then what happened? So now this major life change happens, but in this beautiful place that you enjoyed, you have a career that's kind of going and excelling. Where
I'm
did writing come back into play, and or
I'm
what else happened? Because yeah,
So I'll go through the next steps really quickly because the details are boring. But so I'm a single mother. I'm doing very well at this radio station. It's a huge conglomerate, stations all over the country. I'm in the top 10 of all the salespeople all the time. A new owner comes in and fires me because the sales staff is supposed to go hike Camelback Mountain in the mornings and go to the bars in the evenings. I had kids, I had soccer, I had dinner and
yeah,
homework and laundry. And so he fired me wrongfully. I sued and won. And in the meantime, one of my clients, actually it was a pair, two guys, owned an ad agency, and they asked me to come work for them in advertising. So I did. And then my eldest son needed braces. And so I took him to an orthodontist that the dentist recommended. And then 6 months later, I got free tickets to a Phoenix Suns, the NBA team basketball game in a suite, really bougie suite. And I knew that the orthodontist was single. And so I called and asked him out to the basketball game.
nice.
So then we got married, and that opportunity, he actually said to me early on, about a year into our marriage, listen, I take Fridays off. I don't see patients. I'd really love for you not to have to work on Fridays too, because we can go on long weekends. He had a motorcycle. We used to take motorcycle trips. Would you, by this time I was a partner in the agency, would you be willing to quit the agency? And I said, of course, on one condition. I want to write. I want to write full time. I want to see if I can sell my writing. I can sell books or something like that. And he said, okay. And so he did. I did. And thousands of rejections later, I wrote a lot of newspaper and magazine articles. I wrote two novels. Neither of them has ever seen the light of day. I actually loved the rejection because, like it's between 8 and 10, 12 is the sweet spot. Same thing. I just knew I would get closer to a yes because of all the no's. And that he also is an ex-husband. That ex-husband thought, said to me, "You're delusional, you're crazy." And I said, "I don't think so. I think I can do this." So my father came to visit, and I took him to a World War II museum or antique store. And I knew the owner, and he'd found this collection of papers that had belonged to a man who'd been a prisoner of the Imperial Japanese Army in the Philippines. This guy had bought this dresser, and they were in the drawer.
Oh,
And
wow.
that became my first published book called Belly of the Beast. It's this amazing, unbelievably awful story of our POWs being used being abused in the Philippines and then shipped in container ships to Japan for slave labor. So that was my very first book.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty exciting. And Penguin Putnam published it. After I'd written it, an author friend had connected me to the man who became my first agent, and he got this great contract for me, and it was great. So then I found the next story, and this is really funny. When I left teaching, my mother said, "Oh, I feel so badly that you're leaving. You speak French so beautifully," which was so cute because she did not speak French. I don't know how she knew, but they understood me. So she decided I must do well. And I said, "You know what, Mom? That's never going to be wasted. I'm always going to be able to speak French." I'm telling you, Carolyn, if I hadn't spoken French, I never could have interviewed all the 80-year-old men who during World War II had worked as teenagers with this woman spy I was writing about. And that book, Wolves at the Door, became a bestseller, was purchased for a movie, still sells a gazillion copies. I still get requests from every time something related to the CIA and women happens on a national stage, they call me for interviews. So Virginia Hall was one of the first women CIA agents. What do you have to say about this? And then, so
That's
now I got two
fascinating.
biographies under my belt, or by then, and I was like, okay, so I guess I'm a biographer. But unfortunately, the orthodontist, after 15 years, also he just he he just he had a lot of issues that just made him angry. And I am not an angry person. And by this time my children were grown and I couldn't handle it anymore. He was not violent. He was just not nice to be around. And
Yeah.
so I just said to him one day, I'm sorry, I want to break up. And I don't want anything. I don't want the house. I don't want your money. It was like a country western song. I'm taking my pickup truck and my dog and I'm going to Michigan. And I went back to Michigan. I had bought a little house after my parents died, a little house in my hometown. And day two that I was there in the middle of a blizzard, met my forever husband. And that was 17 years ago. So we've passed the 15-year mark.
So, somewhere in this story, and I don't exactly know where, but there was a health challenge that you
That came
encountered.
next. That comes next.
Okay, tell me. Yes, yes. Okay, tell me.
So I meet
And where are so you're in Michigan
in
or
Michigan.
okay,
I
yeah.
meet this wonderful man. We fell madly in love. We dated for a year, and then he proposed. He too had been married several times. And he had grown children. We had a really simple ceremony on the bluff overlooking my beautiful Lake Michigan. We went across the street to a little park that my mother had helped raise money for when she was still living. We had a reception there. We had blueberry pie. And less than a year later, I was diagnosed with cancer. And the icing on top of that blueberry pie was that my son, who was now in the Air Force, was about to be deployed to Afghanistan. And that was during all the hostilities in Afghanistan. So it was a tough year. It really was.
And you were still writing?
So I had been trying to find the next story after The Spy and or the next book. And I had gotten this idea or gotten very interested in women's courage because having written about a man and then about a woman during these really horrific times, I realized that men's and women's courage is very different. Women are no less courageous than men. They just we exhibit it in different ways. So I was going to write this book about courage, and then I got cancer. And so it was triple negative breast cancer, which is rare and aggressive. And so I had a mastectomy and 18 rounds of chemo while my kid is being shot at by the Afghans, by the
Oh
ISIS,
my God.
actually.
Yeah.
And so we all survived. My marriage survived and my son survived and I
But tell
survived.
me at the beginning though, when you weren't sure and you hear those words, what were your
It
take us back to that in this because sometimes that journey is a whole bunch of I'm not sure, we don't know. Well, let's try another test. And then you finally get some sort of answer. But like how quick like were you just going for a routine mammogram or like what happened?
Well,
Where
no. So 2 months after my routine mammogram that showed nothing, I was simply scratching at my chest while we were watching TV one night, and I felt this lump like in my cleavage. And I said to David, "What is this? And what do you think this is?" And he goes, "I don't know, but I'd never noticed it before." And so I went to my primary care physician and excuse me, we did do, I think an ultrasound was next and or maybe an MRI. And she said, yeah, they need they need that to be biopsied. And I said, okay. So my husband was a firefighter in Indianapolis when he met me, and he was planning to retire in South Haven, which is why he was there that fateful night, but that we met. And I gotten to know a lot of his friends, one of whom was a nurse in Indy, and her sister was a breast cancer survivor. So I called Lynn and said, "What do I do?" And she said, "Well, I only know people here, but the woman I know that I would send anybody to, I think you should go to." And I said, "Okay." So we went to Indianapolis. It's about a 4-hour drive from South Haven, and David's folks were still living there. And I got this biopsy. At the time, this was so cruel. So I'm laying on the table and they numb the area and they just put these little robot arms in and pull the chunk out. And I'm chit-chatting away, which is what I do before a blood test or anything else. So, if
Yeah.
something's gonna hurt, I want to talk and not think about it.
Yep.
And I'm like, and the radiologist who was there, who was doing the biopsy, said to me, "Listen to me. This is very serious." And I don't know how she knew that, that there was
Yeah.
this lump that was a lump in all these other tests, but it was just a lump at that point in time. This is very serious. And I said, "Oh, wow." And then after they make an incision and pull out the skin, the lump, then they send you for a mammogram and smush that thing as hard as they can with an open wound. I don't understand
Oh,
why this is a good thing. So I looked down at the plate with my mushed boob and blood kind of skirting out, a shirt squirting out, and I got really dizzy. And I said, "I'm really sorry. I need to sit down." And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Sure. I think this is cancer. My son's going to Afghanistan, and I'm a newlywed, but I'm fine."
right. Oh,
So, so when the call came, we weren't surprised because we just,
you had so you had a feeling, or just
yeah,
because the person said this is serious?
because of what she said. And it was really cute. My in-laws were down here in Florida when we called to say that when we got confirmation. And David's mom said, they're very spiritual people. And she said, "Listen, this was decided for you before you were born, but God knows what he's doing. And there's probably something good that's going to come out of this." And I said, "Okay." And those were the words I took through.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so how long was that journey for you for the 18 rounds?
My mastectomy I was diagnosed in April. My mastectomy was in May, and I finished chemo just before Thanksgiving. And my oncologist, this is a really good lesson in terms of keeping yourself fit. I was only doing it because I was vain. So I've always watched what I eat. I've always exercised, because I always want to look just so. And my oncologist said to me, "You are very fit." I was 50, like 55, I think at the time. And she said, "You are so very fit. And this is so aggressive. I am going to give you this chemotherapy every other week. Usually I only go every 3 weeks, but I want to get ahead of this. And do you know when they did the pathology on the breast they removed? It was full of cancer. I had dense tissue, which mammography cannot see through. And so afterward, then on my remaining breast, with every mammogram, I got an ultrasound as well because the mammogram was useless, but I had to go that
Yeah.
route first and then do the ultrasound. And then let me just skip ahead a minute. I had 4 biopsies on my right breast, the remaining breast. So over the years, I'd had 4 biopsies. I do not have a BRCA mutation, but my mother's sister died of the same kind of rare breast cancer. So I have a family history, I have a personal history, I had biopsies, and in the interim had learned that we have Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. So all of that meant I was a time bomb. So last year before Thanksgiving, I had the right breast removed prophylactically. They did pathology on it anyway, even though I did not have cancer. They found what's called acute lobular hyperplasia, which means a little group of cells have gotten together and they're organizing and in no time at all, they're going to become cancer. I dodged another bullet. Isn't that
What
amazing?
what absolutely. What made you after all those after the, years and after the things and what made you last year decide, just take her?
Well, okay, the horrible truth. Here's my my vainness coming out again. The horrible truth is when I had the reconstruction with the first mastectomy, the plastic surgeon, who was wonderful, said, "Look, a breast is teardrop shaped. These implants aren't, they're round. So I usually advise women, and I am not very big, I usually advise women to put a little implant under their remaining breast to kind of lift it a little bit so they're kind of even." And I was like, okay. Well, that little bean had slipped out of its muscle capsule and it was going toward my armpit and taking my breast with it. So in a bathing suit, I was horribly conscious. In clothing, I was horribly conscious. My husband kept saying, I don't see anything, but he also never tells me if I have spinach in my teeth. So I was just so self conscious. So part of me said, okay, I'm a time bomb. I'm going to do this. The other part of me was, yeah, another 10 years and I'm going to look like crap. So I pulled the trigger and I wouldn't have probably been alive in the next 10 years.
Wow. And so, but good thing that you did, right? So there was something inside you, regardless how it outwardly got to your conscious, but something was saying this needs to get addressed, and for your benefit.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So something good did come from all of that you went through. Tell a little bit about how that all evolved.
Not good. So after cancer, so during cancer, I was really foggy brain. They call it chemo brain. I was tired. So there was no way I could really think clearly enough to write another biography, nor could I travel to do research or anything else.
Yeah.
Um, so I put together an anthology of some newspaper, of some magazine columns that I had written through the journey. But on the other side of cancer, the courage book just wasn't fitting. I didn't know what I wanted to write. Um, we had also by this time moved back to Phoenix because my chemo made me very cold sensitive. And so Michigan and Chicago, where we had a condo, just weren't working. So back to Phoenix I go. And I was 4 years out of cancer. I started a little nonprofit for women survivors of all cancers who are giving back to the greater good in their survivorship, because there is healing in helping. If you shine your energy out to the greater good, out to the world, you forget all the things that are troubling you. And a second act, we called it, having a second act after any life challenge is important. Doesn't matter whether it's cancer, a divorce, a death, the loss of a job, anything.
Yeah.
And through my organization, I met the woman who became the inspiration for the next book. And I proceeded to write an accidental, out of order trilogy because in researching that first post cancer book called From Shadows to Life, I learned about Mary Lasker, who became the subject of my second post cancer book. And in researching that, I learned more about an amazing woman called Rose Kushner, who, with Shirley Temple Black and Evelyn Lauder, who is the daughter in law of Estee Lauder, the three of them never met, but they independently launched what became the breast cancer movement. And that book came out last September and just won the gold medal Florida Book Award.
Oh, that's amazing. And for people who don't know yet, who was Mary Lasker?
Mary Lasker was a very wealthy philanthropist who was married to the man they call the father of modern advertising, Albert Lasker. It was a second marriage for both of them, and both of them had this passion to cure cancer in the 30s and 40s. And they couldn't figure out why no one was trying to figure out how to cure cancer. A simple pill. There's got to be a pill, or maybe an injection. And so Mary started campaigning against it. Albert sadly died of cancer. I think it was colon cancer. They never really say. They sometimes they call it bowel cancer, sometimes they call it stomach cancer, but I think it was probably colon cancer. And Mary carried on, and eventually, because she had such rich political resources, she and her group convinced Richard Nixon in 1971 to sign the National Cancer Act. And that infused over $1 billion of $71 into cancer research, unheard of amounts. And that in turn started America's research churning to get to the point where we are now. And all the things that have been discovered and tested and found useful are the things that are saving all of our lives today. And actually, the funny thing you said, for those who don't know Mary Lasker, so I wanted to write the next book just about Rose Kushner. And my editor and my agent said, okay,
And
look,
tell us, and Rose Kushner was, how was she related? Yeah.
she was the middle woman of these three.
Yeah.
She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 74. She changed legislation so that insurance companies were mandated to cover mammograms and reconstruction, which they did not do until the 1990s, and to insert notification in birth control pills that the level of estrogen was a carcinogen. And other amazing things, testified before Congress. I mean, she was a rock star, wrote the very first handbook for women to get themselves through breast cancer treatment because there was nothing. I had the advantage of reading all these other women's journeys. So anyway, my agent and editor said, look, we love that you want to write about these people that no one knows, but we all want to sell books. So let's add some famous names. And my editor said, Shirley Temple Black, first celebrity to come out about her cancer. And my agent said, Evelyn Lauder took up the reins after Estee Lauder retired. She created the pink ribbon. She, really drove the modern era of breast cancer.
Wow. So these women came before you, helped set the stage for your eventual treatment. You then have this second act that you create to help other people shine a light on the good that they're doing in the world after their cancer. And oh, by the way, while you're doing all of that, you're continuing to go back and tell the stories that many people don't know, to bring those
Right.
to light, to help
That's
people
right.
learn.
And the last thing I want to leave you with is my other firm belief is that there's always treasure in life's wreckage. So I left teaching because of the reasons I told you. But if I hadn't known French, I never could have written that second book, which really launched my writing career. I learned to sell through cosmetics and the radio station. But as a writer, you have to sell yourself and sell the fact that you can tell a story, that you can link together a bunch of facts and people and themes and make it all make sense and make readers want to read it. And my advertising background, people have this wonderful rosy picture that writers sign a contract, get $1 million advance, and sit back and rake in the rest. Here's the truth. Most of those people, particularly non-writers, so famous actors, actresses, politicians who write books and get multi-million-dollar advances, they never earn out those advances to start making royalties. In other words, it's like an advance against commission, where they give you $1,000 a month, and then you're supposed to sell more than that to make more in that month. So what happens to 99.9% of all authors is we have to maintain social media, send newsletters, go out to book events, speaking events, festivals. We are forever on the road and still writing in between. So
Yeah.
all of that, all of those, oh, gee, and then she got divorced. Oh, gee, and then she got cancer. All of those things taught me new things.
And they ended up working for you.
Yeah.
And so now, two more things. Number one, how do you define authentic success for you in this moment?
You know, I was a stint. I just had this conversation with my granddaughter. There was a stint during high school where the mean girls got together and decided they didn't like Judy. And I felt so badly about it. There was nothing they just didn't like me. So there was nothing about me that I could change. I couldn't look different. I couldn't speak differently. I couldn't do anything to be different. So I really learned to just play down what I was. And I have a really hard time accepting praise or any kind of accolade. That's really hard for me. Plus, it's boastful and all those other things. When someone comes to me, and this can be true about, and I keep looking over my book stuff, this can be true about any of the books that I've written. When someone comes to me and says, I heard you say this or that, or I read this or that, and it really moved me and it really helped me. And I was able to do fill in the blank. When someone tells me that something I've done has helped them, I feel successful, even if
That's
it's just
beautiful.
one. And in fact, my husband and I have always said, just before I get ready to go speak somewhere, I just need to touch one person, just one.
Oh, that's beautiful. So speaking of getting ready to go and speak somewhere, you're getting ready to go to the Women, Life, and Science event that is going to be happening in Greenville, South Carolina on April 30th. You are the keynote speaker. And the night before, there's going to be a book signing with your latest book. But give a little preview of what's the topic that you're going to be talking about at this keynote, because there's still maybe time to get tickets.
I think that most people at my age may just consider that they've done enough and they're going to retire and they're going to enjoy grandchildren and traveling or whatever retirement looks like. I kind of feel like I may be able to help younger women by telling them stories of things that might be coming, and by telling them whatever junky stuff they're going through, it's not the end of the day. It's not forever. It's just for now. And just keep taking steps forward. And that's hard sometimes. So I try to come up with phrases and stop checks and things like that to help women, men too, but I could speak more knowledgeably to my sisters so that they know, hey, this is not going to be like this forever.
It's going to be fascinating. You're definitely going to be able to inspire women of all ages and stages in their life and career for digging deeper, realizing that everything is indeed happening for them, sharing your story, sharing the stories you've written of so many wonderful others. I can't wait to meet you, to see you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody, but to giving you a big hug for this opportunity to be on your show.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you so very much. I look forward to getting this out into the world. And I wish you all the best with your next success as that
Thank you.
continues to evolve. And thank you so, so much, Judy, for being on the show today and for sharing even more about you.
Absolutely.
Judy, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. I can hardly wait to see you in just a few short weeks at the Women, Life, and Science event in Greenville, South Carolina. Thanks for listening to Your Next Success with Dr. Carolyn Sengel. Remember, authentic success is yours to define and includes aligning your career to support the life you want.